Welcome to Isn't It Obvious, where things are obvious. That's going to be an intro.
So Battletoads is really just authoritarianism via video game, being so crushingly difficult that it was just meant to suck up quarters the entire time. Regardless how good you actually did, you never could win that game.
I don't think it's authoritarianism as it's just capitalism.
No, it's not capitalism, because there's
fucking
no way of
time,
buying
you
your way out of
guys.
something.
Every goddamn time. Right topic. Isn't it obvious that windmills are just big fans
No?
of the show? No? Crickets?
What?
No.
The what?
Okay, for real though. For real though. Sorry.
Wait,
That's not the... It's just a stupid joke. I had a day, alright? Listen. Okay. For reals now. Isn't it obvious that there's nothing you can't joke about?
The Holocaust?
You can totally make a joke about the Holocaust.
And expect to have the same social standing afterward?
Sure. I mean, definitely depends on the audience, and you have to be doing it in a setting where it's understood that you're joking.
Okay.
Like, you wouldn't just come out and say, like, how about them dead bodies, or whatever, but...
What about various forms of mental infirmment?
Like schizophrenia or like bipolar
Like Down
disorder?
syndrome?
No. Yeah, Down syndrome, ALS.
You can totally make jokes about that, you know.
As someone who's not part of that, if you're in that community, yes, but not everyone can make a joke about that. Like, Amy Schumer's joke about her husband having autism is really bad, but she's also not funny.
I was gonna say, I don't know, that there is a difference between funny and not funny jokes, but I still think you could find a funny joke about any of these subjects. Seriously.
I do think that depends on the angle and the way it's delivered, because
absolutely
to kind of extend on what Micah mentioned, the Holocaust, I think the joke that Ricky Gervais has about the Holocaust actually made me laugh, but he's telling it to, it's like Comedians in Cars, he's telling it to Jerry Seinfeld about like this joke about, oh, you can't make anything funny these days because people are very sensitive to certain topics. This is like a comedian's plight in their job, that they realize that the younger generations don't find things to be humorous and they have to be politically correct, which they don't like being politically correct because it hinders their ability to be creative. And then Ricky Gervais makes a comment like, oh, well, you know, like I have this joke about concentration camps. You know, he kind of explains it. Someone dies, goes to heaven, God is there, and one of the concentration camp victims is explaining this joke that had happened there. God says, like, I don't understand why that's funny. And then the victim says something, oh, well, you know, I guess you had to be there. And, you know, I was like, what the hell is this joke? Like, this is not a criticism of, like, the Holocaust or Nazism. It's, like, the criticism of, like, people who
don't get it.
Just don't get it, or are super religious that always believe there's a plan, right? Because in this case... This topic
was chosen with Ricky Gervais's philosophy about jokes in mind. So,
well, okay. So
that was so you quote, or you bringing him into it? Yes, he's the person that started getting me thinking about this topic, and that no, there really isn't anything you can't make fun of if you do it in the right way.
There has to be like a level of like a straight man and what you call it, like someone who's just is a goof off. Like again, I'm going to make another Ricky Gervais comment where it's Liam Neeson who comes in and he wants to be a comedian. And it's like, I believe it's Ricky Gervais and Steve Merchant. And they're like, okay, well, what do you have for material? Like, are you good at improv? And Liam's like really, in his really grave voice, is like, yes, I'm very good at improv. And it's like, okay, well, why don't you start the scene and we'll kind of play off on it? And he's like, I have AIDS. Like, it's just like ridiculous seriousness. And they're like they're both struggling about how to like continue this. So I think the way to make that joke about like, well, it's not funny to have, you know, to make fun of AIDS or an AIDS. You know,
yeah, you're not making fun of the victim.
Right.
You're making fun of maybe the circumstances or how people think about it, or you're not, like, I would agree it's not really funny to necessarily make fun of a victim.
But you're kind of making fun of like the juxtaposition between someone who's trying to be a comedian and the subject. And I guess my angle would be then like, well, it's really hard to get that approach, right? That right level of like, I'm going to talk about this
without totally crossing the line into...
Right, but then I'm going to make myself the butt of the joke. I guess in comedy, there's a sense of you can't be punching down. So if you're a guy who's able-bodied and you make fun of your spouse that's, you know, and you say, oh, they have autism, it's kind of like you're punching down. You're making fun of someone's mental cognitive abilities.
For full context, the whole thing is that she doesn't know what Asperger's is, and that's the joke.
Right.
But it's
like,
I don't know, whatever.
Not a funny one.
No.
And I think the same goes for like things that are very difficult to talk about. They're using that as like a prop, but they're not necessarily making fun of that. They're making fun of the person's incompetence to understand it, right? Or they're making fun of themselves in a self-deprecating way. But they can't punch down, which I often felt like is a very dangerous game for comedians.
Well, like,
because
or presidential candidates that win.
Right.
I was going to say, like, Ricky will make jokes about fat people. He won't insult them because they are fat. He will, that's sort of like incidental. He'll insult their intelligence because they make excuses. So that he's really making fun of the fact that they're making excuses for why they are the way they are. And he's like, no, you just eat too much. That's it. You just eat too much. And he's not wrong, necessarily.
But he's not addressing the underlying issue why that person has that unhealthy compulsion to indeed eat too much.
True. And he's not addressing the fact that, there literally are struggles that are not just because you eat too much. It's psychological for some because they just have that compulsion, but it's also biological too because they might have a slower metabolism, but stuff like that. But even then it's like, but no, you still, it's because you eat too much and you don't exercise. And that's just his line. And he's not making fun of the fact that they're fat. He's making fun of the fact that they're making excuses about it.
He's just incidentally making fun of them due to their overweightness.
No, because they're making excuses.
The main crux of this is the fact that someone is overweight.
It's the obvious.
He doesn't make the same jokes like an anorexic.
Though is
the problem with you is you don't eat enough. Right. He's not making that joke. He's only making the joke with those that are in excess.
True.
Yeah.
That I know.
That's a good point. Like, for some reason, that's crossing the line to me. I wouldn't, like, I'm laughing hearing this because to me, it's like, he's not making fun of, fat people per se. He's making fun of people's inability of ownership of excuse, right? Like, hey, look, I'm just going to make every explanation possible except for the fact that I need to, have ownership of my life. I find that to be kind of like, okay, that's a little silly. Like,
and I don't know where you'd get, like, I don't know if it's really the same. Like, anorexia isn't quite the same. Like, you'd think it is because
but there's
it's
an underlying
like the polar
psychological condition
opposite.
that could cause their whatever end of the spectrum you're on.
True, but there's nothing. They aren't making excuses. Is the real joke though? Like, anorexic people aren't making excuses for why they're so thin necessarily, unless they're lying because they don't want people to think they're anorexic. But I don't.
Oh yeah, like.
But that's not.
There is not to cut you off, Sarah, but there is a funny thing about like the anorexic mentality is that not that I know anyone who is anorexic, but that they honestly believe.
Get out of here.
That they
look. See, you can totally make a joke about it. Anyway, sorry.
The idea that they believe that they're too they're not the body shape they want to be. Mm-hmm. And so they're going to take actions to get there.
Yeah.
Right? Like they're purposely doing in their head positive actions to get what they want.
Yep.
Whereas people who are eating too much, I guess, in a very
simple... They're dismissing their ownership. They're dismissing their agency for their condition.
So one of them is clearly like, okay, this is really bad, right? Because people are actively sabotaging themselves even if they don't know it. Or they're trying to get this goal, which is an absolutely terrible thing to do. And the other one is just eating too much.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's like, I'm not trying to, like, when I laugh, I'm not laughing because they're fat. I'm not laughing because I'm well aware that it's hard. It sucks. It sucks to be overweight. There's a lot more challenges that you face health-wise, but also socially. Like that part's not funny. The funny part is the fact that people who are overweight will dismiss their own agency of why they are the way they are, and they'll make up excuses. And that's what, in my reading of Ricky Gervais's joke, is what he's making fun of. Which is fucking hilarious because let's be honest, like no one these days takes any responsibility for their own.
So then why does he have to specifically pick on overweight people?
American politics.
Why can't he bring it up to something else? He's picking on overweight people because that is an easy comedic trope. And he's an old racist man.
Yes.
Actually, I don't know if he's racist, but...
Is he? I don't know if he's racist either.
He's definitely like the old British version of a bro.
I don't really think a little bit, but not really a bro. He's actually, like, pretty... smart?
Why are you assuming that bros aren't
He's not
intelligent?
because I assume that bros are just like, oh yeah, I just did a... Well, I don't know. He probably does all of those fucking things. He's a rich bro. Forget it. It's fine. But,
no.
I don't know. he makes points. I don't know if they're all valid, and I'd say that some of them are still controversial. But like, I kind of agree that there's really, if you do it in the right way, there's nothing you can't
understand the fact that constraints on,
and he doesn't just pick on fat people.
I don't know. We have 10 minutes. We have 10 minutes
picks
of
on
you
everybody
specifically
equally.
trying to break down that one joke.
Well, he's got plenty of other insulting things. Like, he insults religion
you're...
all the time, which is like my bread and butter.
Well, yeah, but
so.
Also horoscopes and, people who believe in
believing that their underwear will save them.
What, that's what my thong
bullets.
does every day. That's why I go out as the bravest person in the world. My thong with a Canadian flag on it protects me from everything.
Have you seen the Latter-day Saints underwear? That is not a thong.
What are the Latter-day Saints?
Just saying.
Is that like New England's minor league team? Or
Mormons.
New Orleans minor league team?
Oh my god.
No, it's like they're a choir, I thought, right? It's like
they are a wonderful choir.
No, aren't those
like, holy
eunuch
God.
children, so they maintain their
the Brigham Young
soprano?
Singers? Oh, no, that's like the Catholic Church, I believe, way back in the day.
Hey, as a Catholic, I don't know enough about any of this, so let's just move on.
I could be speaking.
I think it was the Vienna Boys Choir, but I could be mistaken, where they would castrate them for the sake of not allowing them to hit puberty, so they maintain their high soprano singing voice. For the glory of God, of course.
Mm-hmm. God, it's just the stupidest things that people do.
They're not.
I'm gonna just cut off my child's balls. Yep, that's what I'm gonna do. So he sings like an angel for the rest of his life.
And then conspires with the Queen of Dragons to take over Westeros.
Ah, yes, becomes the spider, destroys the world as we know it.
I don't know how we got to castration, but...
Well, apparently we can make fun of anything, so let's make fun of castration.
We were talking about cucumbers earlier.
All right.
Man, there was a good Chinese drama I was watching, and they have like eunuchs or whatever, and so like a eunuch and this lord were just chatting, and this asshole lord like makes a joke about the fact that he didn't have any balls, and the poor eunuch is just sitting there stone faced like, yeah, that's super funny. Yep. Mm-hmm. But I laughed. I'm sorry. I'll admit it. I laughed. It was a good setup. I shouldn't know. I need to stop watching these dramas, man.
There was this Korean drama I was watching a while back where they were trying to get like palace guards or servants for the king. And they had all these children that were running this obstacle course, and if they failed, they weren't going to make it.
They were going to be executed?
Yeah. No, they just wouldn't be like a
guard. Okay, we said
they
weren't going to make it. I'm like they're going to be killed.
And
what was that? A 4-8-40?
Too slow. Okay. Well, the idea though is like all these kids are kind of like street kids, right? Like they don't really have any parents, and this is their only way to get like food. So many of them, are trying to secure a spot of shelter, and to do that they give you a servant. But to be a servant in that palace means that for a male servant you have to be castrated, because they have to make absolute certainty that
nothing
the queen is
untoward will happen.
Right. And like in this story, like the protagonist is doing his best to do this like silly obstacle course and doesn't get any mud on him or something, and so he gets to the next round where they start like castrating these kids that might get to the next step. So if they fail, they just lost their manlyhood
for nothing.
But for nothing. But they all are so poor that they don't really see much of a choice. This is like kids. And so there was the protagonist didn't like already have the balls, I guess. So like there was like a medical confusion, because normally you're supposed to like do something, and then they asked like one of the consorts to come in there and be like, what the hell is this? Like, we haven't seen this, but you probably seen it because you're kind of like in that trade, right? So why don't you come here and tell us what this is? And then the consort's like, oh yeah, I've seen that before, it's sterile. And then like later on in the series it turns out he's not, and like what's happening with the queen.
The prequel to the Hunger Games is weird.
Oh my god.
And I was like looking at this story and I'm like, the only thing I could get in this, like the only thing I can understand from this is like
point?
It's like, man, those kids are screwed, right? Like the idea that people would castrate themselves is not because or as like a funny
they want
point.
To eat.
It's like they want to eat, right?
Yeah.
Like that is the system that exists, is food. Like everything else is secondary. Even
give it
like,
2 terms of
to
Trump
reproduce.
presidency, and we'll see that in real life.
And I'm like, well, the idea that of chemical castration, right? Of people that are offenders or people that are unwanted in society. Like, what is that? Basic eugenics. It's like, okay, well, we just don't like these groups of people. What can we do to make sure they don't produce again? I don't know, let's make them all sterile. This idea is kind of goes hand in hand with poverty. So when I think about castration, I often think about like, oh, it sucks to be poor, doesn't it? Like, it sucks to have lots of poor people, too. This is the reason why this system exists. So when I think about the Vienna Boys Choir, I often try to look at it like, well, how poor were these people back then?
Yeah, they pretty much sold their children at that point to eat.
I think that's probably the context missing is that, oh, people really, really are hungry and they want food. And how do they do that? Children are nothing much more than just barter chips, I guess.
I don't know. If I had my way, we would just sterilize the entire population.
And then just ride out with one last just
not
the final
permanently.
Human generation, and we all go into oblivion.
No, no permanent sterilization. More like hit pause on their reproductive capabilities. And then if they reach a certain age and are at a certain productivity level in society, then they're allowed to reproduce.
So only if the party deems them acceptable, they can reproduce.
Select their...
They need to have the
pretty much
license.
They need to. Yep, it would be whoever's in charge, which sucks, but
I'm going to say that there's some sort of self-imposing limit right now for that. If you look at our grandparents' generation, it wasn't uncommon for them to have 5 or 6 kids.
That's an outlier from
11.
pre-industrial age, where,
Christ.
Especially in America, the fact that there are so many farms, that the more kids meant you had more workers. More workers meant you farmed more. You farm more,
That's
you have
true.
a slightly better living to have more kids, to have more workers.
That, and you could afford to feed 11 children on one person's
who
salary.
doesn't love weenie water soup 5 days
and own a house? Your kids will sleep in, 2 to a bed minimum, but
head to foot and alternating.
I don't want to sleep next to my brother or sister's gross feet.
I don't think you have a choice. Also,
no, why wouldn't you just sleep head to head like a normal fucking person? Feet belong on one end of the bed and heads belong on the other.
Is that obvious?
That is
we will find
obvious,
out next
Micah.
episode if that
what
is
were
indeed
you
obvious.
thinking?
Right.
For fuck's sake.
I feel like, though, that there's this self-imposed, not sterility, but just non-reproductive. I mentioned permits and license in order to have kids, but it's already kind of happening, right? Like, if you're in the middle class-ish, you're not going to have any more than 3 kids at most. I mean, it's just not
feasible,
conducive to someone's quality of life. They just don't want to take the hit. I guess there's some outliers, right? Like, I guess the poorer you are, maybe there's the
why do you say that?
More children, I guess. But like, I think that the reason why I say that is because
government currently gives you benefits for having a certain amount of children.
I also think that there's less education when it comes to procreation as well.
Yeah.
Like, there's a certain type of like, and again, I only know the suburban princess lifestyle. That's all I'm accustomed to.
Samesies.
But in that route, right? Like, if you put your talent points in that route, there's not a lot of branches you can go off on and screw you over unless you really decided to. And that route, it's like, well, you're going to meet people that are very similar in the socioeconomic status. And then also on top of that, you're not going to want to sacrifice too much. And you're going to have this kind of forward thinking about what your next moves should be. But the less wealthy you are and the less chances you have for like mentorship or guidance, and the more like, oh, I'm just going to go out there and have fun. Like, I think that this kind of contributes to my 100% understanding why people wish that there was some cap on having kids, because they can see lower income lifestyles where like, well, they have kids that are at age 17, way too young. Someone has kids in their early 20s. I'm like, do you know what you're doing? I would question their wherewithal.
Readiness.
Right. I'm like, oh, you have a kid at 21? That's ridiculously early, right? Like, what is your plan here?
Although in some people's minds, it's getting old now because they've been taught that having kids, you need to have kids early. You need to pop them out early because once you hit 30, you can't have kids anymore. You're too old, which is bullshit. That's fucking bullshit. You can have kids up to 40. Well, I mean, there's been, people having children at 60, but
for the
oldest. I thought it was 66.
By someone named Agnes.
I mean, she can have a kid and...
I mean, what was
Doesn't matter. Point is...
Was it Quincy Adams' great-grandson was still alive in the 1950s? Or something like that? Something ludicrous like that. Or Andrew Johnson?
Yeah.
I believe it.
Because, Andrew Johnson had his kid at, 75. And then his kid had the grandkid when he was, 67 or something. So it's just old lineage of a former president that spanned 160 years.
I'm thinking more in the perspective of a woman, though, here. Because, we all know men can put out far longer without any, real risk. of complications during pregnancy. Whereas a woman, I think, once you hit like maybe 40s and up, it starts getting like there's a higher chance of.
Or you could just be an African American woman in America, regardless of age.
No, I'm talking about specifically pregnancies, Micah. Do they have like higher instances of complications?
5 times higher than a white woman dying from complications of birth.
Oh yeah.
Well, now I feel ashamed. I know less about demographic and pregnancies than 2 men on this show. Well,
no, I mean, one of the reasons why I would have some understanding of this is because the editor and I, when we were looking at child family growth activities, they said something like 33 is considered to be a geriatric pregnancy. Like
33?
Not 30, maybe not geriatric, but perhaps it's a different word, like elderly or something, like something that doesn't sound good.
Holy crap. Well, my mother had me at 35 and she had my brother
mom was
at 40,
37.
so...
Right.
And we turned out okay.
But the idea that like risk to the woman like starts to shoot up pretty high, like exponentially after a certain age. And like, I guess biologically speaking, it sort of kind of rattles my brain because it means like, that means we should be having kids in our teens or something.
Idea.
Like,
how about we just
that sounds like a terrible idea, right? Like in my brain,
easier. Just all around easier. You get to keep all your money, you keep your autonomy, do what you want when you want, unless you have pets. Less legal consequences to leaving them alone, but they're basically children.
There is this weird thought though, like for me, it never occurred to me just to like, okay, so we have friends that have kids and we have friends that are married that don't. This is a very common situation. And I've always been told by my parents, like, oh, well, if you don't have kids, you're going to be sad when you're 40 because you're going to feel like you missed something. And you will. And you
it's the biggest scam and lie I've ever heard. Sorry,
and you'd be very, very disappointed in your life. And I'm like, well, that's very strange because, like, how do I vet that source? Like, how would I be like, oh, okay, well, let me talk to your parallel version of yourself in a different universe and ask that person who didn't have kids. Like, same you, mom, but just the one that didn't have the kids version.
Yeah, you'll find them on a beach somewhere tropical, sipping something fruity and alcoholic in the sun with no cares.
I mean,
and all the money.
that would preclude the ability for even someone who doesn't have kids to make money, which, again, with how messed up our economic system is in this country, is always in question, with or without kids.
I mean, like I'm saying, it's still difficult, but I don't think that's true for everybody. My brother is doing pretty well for himself. Asshole. and my future sister-in-law, they're doing pretty well for themselves, and they're probably going to buy a house in the next couple of months, probably. God,
I feel like if we talk about like good things that are happening to relatives, it's like, oh, I'm really happy for them. And then you just space, like asshole.
Yeah, right. No, I love them, and I am happy for them.
Fast forward 2 years.
Kind of an asshole, though.
Yeah, like, I mean, he is, but that has nothing to do with the fact that he's doing better than me. He's just, a bit of an asshole because sorry, Micah, but he's a white male, really privileged white male.
I'm going to interject here by saying, like, those that, for me, when I had my children, like, it wasn't the thought that, like, oh, well, now I have to spend more resources for something that I wish I could use on a beach. It's actually like the exact opposite, where it's like, oh, now I have to take more risk so I can get better rewards. Like, I have to push myself and, try to make these type of decisions in order to be able to be more financially secure. Like, I never had that type of motivation intrinsically. It was always externally, like other people saying, oh, you should do this, Philip, you should do that. And it wasn't until I had kids, it's like, oh, well, okay, now I understand why people are saying this, and now I actually have to get off my butt and start doing things. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, because I don't think I would work as hard if I didn't have kids. I would just probably be happy as a draftsman and just kind of, just coast. Like, just enough to get the latest video game console and play video games and not worry about retirement, and that's it, right? Like, I wouldn't try to better myself in any other way.
That's fair.
So I think there is like a weird step function that occurs. The other is
retirement?
Retiring, yeah.
It's called retcon, because it used to exist, but now we just decided to eliminate it from history. Now no one knows what that word is. So retcon.
I'm still putting into my retirement. So
well,
hopefully
US currency
someday
won't actually mean anything in about 5 years. So that's why you have to diversify and get yourself some good metal in the shape of a gun and some other metal in the shape of bullets. because we are heading headlong into a Fallout future.
No, it's cool. I just need one bullet. That's fine. One bullet, one gun. I'll be okay.
This is where you're both wrong.
I don't agree with Mike at all. So that was a joke. I don't think we're heading towards an apocalypse. We've been through worse as a country. We'll make it out of it. Like the Civil War, like the Revolutionary War, like when we were just coming over here and dying of smallpox
I'm pretty
and
sure
killing all the
dying
natives.
Of smallpox into the 1890s.
Yeah, dying of dysentery.
Well, you don't dysentery.
Cholera and other just all those horrible things that we've sort of mostly overcome or have mitigated.
So how is our current situation in any way related to bacterial and viral infections that kill people because they didn't have any type of medicine? Because we don't have our current issue in this country is not an external influence from a virus. Apart from the concept of an idea as a virus.
Pretty much everything we're dealing with now, we've been dealing with for a very long time.
And are we as a country prepared to actually survive through the reckoning that has to happen? That's the question, and that's where my uncertainty and pessimism lie.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to go ahead and say it's like accelerationism, which is a terrible philosophy, but I mean, you could clearly see that there's a lot of cracks in our system right now, from education all the way up to employment, from wealth inequality, and just the terrible standards of quality of life that we have. It's very frustrating though when you try to talk this type of discussion with people that came from third world countries and then decided to live in America. They're like, oh, Phil, you have no idea how good you have it. You have a problem with understanding history if you think that American quality of life is bad. Because where I'm from, it's very bad. And you sound very spoiled when you say that, you wish you had better healthcare. Okay, I mean, fair enough, because I don't really understand what it's like to live in a very bad country. But on the other hand, I don't like the trend I'm seeing either. The quality of life for most Americans are going down, that we've been the most productive we've ever been in the history of this country, but we're making less than we did real wages in the 1970s. And insert all these talking points here. And then they kind of have this blank look like, no, Phil, you have it wrong. You just have a very easy life. Your hands are soft. That sort of expression. If I extrapolate what's happening now to what's going to happen 5 or 10 years from now, I don't see like guns and ammo being like the currency.
No, it'll be bottle caps.
But I do see a lot of people bottle caps. I'm sorry.
There won't even be bottle caps. There'll be
no. Coca-Cola's going to keep producing into the future. They have so much of whatever
the neighbors
goo makes it Coca-Cola that it will just print ad infinitum.
I feel it's more likely we'll stop making like bottles. There won't be bottles. Everyone will break all the bottles. There's no bottle manufacturers and there's no bottle cap manufacturers left. So you'll just have nothing. You'll have rocks as currency.
Well,
or
for any of these potential futures, we will discuss them on another episode of Isn't It Obvious?
Wait, weren't we making like a point about jokes or something? Windmills, you guys. Big fans.
Thanks, Mom.
Love you, Mom. Bye.
Bye, Mom.